Today on the show, we have Cindy Arledge. Cindy is a second-generation entrepreneur who experienced financial loss and a broken relationship after her parents passed away 8 months apart from one another. What happened is her family wasn't prepared for the loss when it came to what would happen with the estate. So out of pain, out of heartache, out of loss, Cindy created a niche for herself to help other people not to go through the same pain by educating them and helping them strategize for their estate when they leave it to their loved ones. Cindy, welcome to the Whole Person Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Evan, and thank you for having me.
Good. Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you here. Well, Cindy, just jumping right into it, tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit more of your background that wasn't covered in the intro.
Well, and that was a beautiful background. Thank you very much. And, the most important thing for me is my role as Elmo. That's my grandmother name. The grandkids couldn't say Oma, the German name. So I became Elmo. And that is my most important role as a human being. It's truly the role of the matriarch and making sure that what's important to us as a family continues on for generations. So that's my most important thing that, I would like people to know about me. The fact that I went back to college as a single mom and earned my bachelor's degree and master's degree, those are some of my top moments in my life. And then I walked 500 miles across Spain and completed the Camino de Santiago, wrote my first book, which kind of opened a doorway. And now so far I've written 3 more. So that's me.
For one, walking 500 miles, how long did that take?
Shockingly, it only took 37 days.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, just out of curiosity, I'm guessing they had places for you to stay along the way, or is it like...
Yes, it's an ancient pilgrimage in Europe that all roads lead to Santiago, Spain. And there's a lot of different paths. There's a movie called The Way with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez. If I watched it, and that's what kind of inspired me. I saw an interview with Shirley MacLaine, and she was in her 60s when she did it. And I wasn't in my 60s yet. And I thought, well, Shirley MacLaine can do it in her 60s. Surely I can do it. And I went to test my theory that I came up with after my mom and dad passed away about how to live a life of ease and grace, even when things don't go your way. And so that's what I did. I tested my theory by walking 500 miles.
That's fantastic. My goodness. Well, let's just jump right into it. Part of the whole person is not only financial, it's family, it's legacy. And so often, when it comes to the idea of the whole person, we don't think about what happens to us after we die. We don't think about how our plans right now affect what happens later. And, you challenged me with coming up with my will before we met, and I did not do that yet. So I gotta confess that right off the bat. But you talk about planning for your family members after you precede them in life. And so with that being said, what advice would you give to someone who's really not wanting to think about or at this point in time? Because I'm young, I'm young. Why should I start thinking about that now?
Well, what I write about in my book is spoiler alert. You don't have to be old to die. That's the first thing, right? And the second piece of it is you don't have to die to suffer from a bad estate plan.
Yeah.
Because a will is a series of documents that keep you legal, because the arena that we live in, we live in a legal arena, Evan. I mean, you don't have the right to your spouse's medical information unless you have the legal right to do so, which most people feel that that's incredulous. They're like, what? The doctor won't talk to me about my own wife? It's like, no, we live in a legal arena and you have to have the legal documents to thrive. And so a will is more than just what happens to you after you pass away. It actually protects you while you're alive.
Mm. So, as someone who is still young, what would be some of the first things that I should start thinking about to just safeguard my family?
Well, and if it's all right with you, I'll give you a couple of life events to make this easier, right? So your first life event is the day you turn 18. On the day that you turn 18, ideally your parents would have taken you to an attorney and gotten a financial power of attorney and a medical power of attorney, because that's the day they no longer could make legal decisions for you. So that's the first life event. The second life event would be when you get married or start a business. Because a lot of people start a business maybe with a partner, not realizing that if they or their partner don't have a legal estate, then your business could be tied up in probate that could, damage your ability to be successful. And then the third most important life event for me is that when you become a parent. Because the moment that you become a parent, if you don't have an estate plan, then whatever state you're living in, you've given them the right to make all the decisions for your family.
Yeah, I don't like that idea.
Well, and the thing is, you don't know what you don't know. Like death, aging, and really money are taboo topics in our society. We don't know how to talk about it. We're not comfortable talking about it. And we actually have a natural bias in our brain that says, oh, I've got time. I've got dirty dishes. I've got to get the kid to soccer. I've got my taxes due. Those are way more important than trying to figure out this whole death thing. And if you are open to it, I'd love to know what your experience has been like getting ready for this interview, knowing that we had this accountability. What were some of the things that you went through that prevented you from being successful?
Honestly, so the only time my wife and I really get to ourselves is 8:39-ish o'clock, maybe around that time, if one of the boys isn't consistently getting out of bed. And by that time, we're so tired that to give thought to something becomes quite a bit more difficult because we're already at the point of like exhaustion, it feels like. And so I'd say that was probably the biggest hindrance, is just wanting to check out for the rest of the evening.
So do you have family that lives in the area?
I do.
Do you get a regular date night by any chance?
We don't.
Well, and so my whole goal, and in your introduction, you said it's about leaving, after you're gone. Well, actually for me, legacy is about living, because to leave a legacy, you have to have lived a legacy. Right? And so I believe in living a life of ease and grace. And I routinely will set up a date night for my daughter with their husbands. And it's a diabolical way of getting more grandkids. I'm just saying. But it also gives them time to, be better parents. And, I said my role is the most important as Elmo. And having a time with your spouse makes you a better parent, which makes a life easier for my grandkids. Mm. And so I would challenge you that it's time for you to build a life of ease and grace. I actually have 3 personal legacy questions I ask people to help them do that.
Go for it. Ask them.
All right. So how do you want to experience life?
In what capacity, I guess? Let's define that a little more.
Yeah. So for me, I was the last person on the airplane. I was that person that people side-eyed, right? They were shutting the door. I was pulling because I used to travel a lot, right? And I was always just right on time. I believed in being just on time, but that was a stressful way to live.
Gotcha.
So when I decided that how do I want to experience life, stress wasn't in my how do I want to experience it. So I started making micro changes to live a life filled with ease and grace. And that included being 2 or 3 hours ahead of the airport, getting through security, taking a good book to enjoy, or my computer to write. As an author, you give me a pad and paper and I can work from anywhere, right?
Right.
And so I changed the way I started managing my time because I wanted to experience a life of ease and grace.
So in that context, it would probably be fairly similar. I recently took a values test. Like, what are my core values, outside of religion and stuff like that? And one of them was, the one that scored highest was to live a life of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'm fairly good at being on time or early, but to live a life of peace would mean that, my environment is not cluttered. It means that we have a more disciplined life in the context that we do the things that right now we don't want to do when we don't want to do them. That, for example, like just doing the dishes versus letting them pile up, or being strategic about, okay, you know what? We need to get our eating under control. So we're going to just modify some of our behaviors, I would say do the small things consistently that will lead to change versus living life by default and getting the results of that.
Yes. And that's, to your point, this setting your intention of living a life of grace and ease and peace of mind, knowing that your family's taken care of is one of the most unique peace of minds that you'll ever achieve.
Right.
It's like you're carrying a boulder and you don't even know that you're carrying it until it gets taken care of. And then you take this deep breath. You're like, my family's taken care of.
Yeah.
So that's my first question. How do you want to live? And then you start making those micro changes. The second question is, what is the impact that you want to make? Most people think, oh, I have to die and leave a bunch of money. But really, when you start thinking about your impact, you can make impact every single day. And when you add this impact question into how do you want to live? So let's just take your dirty dishes, right? So the impact that I want to give is a life of peacefulness, teach my children how to do that. Then doing the dishes actually become a part of your mission. They're not something to be avoided. There's something to be embraced because you've changed the perspective of the activities that you're doing and you've elevated them to something of importance. I make my bed every morning because I think a bed that has been made sleeps better. 5-minute, 3-minute, teeny tiny things. Ben Hardy, I really adore him. And he says, tiny hinges swing big doors.
Yeah, they do.
So the tiny, and your kids, your children are how old?
6, 3, and 6 months.
So you do have your hands full. I mean, they outnumber you 3-2. So that can be a challenge.
Fighting.
And what's fascinating is what I love is that because, again, going back to Elmo, teaching my kids, your 6-year-old is big enough to start helping.
Yeah.
And the 3-year-old can, depending on the day, right? I mean, you
pick things up off the ground, which he does.
Yeah, absolutely. And the celebration of that, this like, you're really helping mom and daddy. And this is a huge help. And one of the people that Ben's turned me on to is BJ Fogg of Tiny Habits book of celebrating everything that you do. Like every single toy that they pick up, celebrate that with them. And it's easier to do things when you're celebrating them than when you're dreading them. So for every dish that you wash, yay, that's a clean dish. It just really starts building momentum.
That makes sense.
And then the third question, we've talked about how do you want to experience life? We've talked about what impact do we want to make? This third question gets a little tricky. Because it's how do you want to be remembered? And for me, it started out as a way for me to show up as my best self when life wasn't going my way. And I'll give you a perfect example. And I kind of learned this on the Camino, walking 500 miles across Spain. As soon as I got home, my son-in-law did his first triathlon. And I wanted to go support him. So I made my hotel reservations for the Woodlands, Texas. And I was going to go spend the night because it starts, at dark 30. The triathlons start really early. They go all day. And I even called and double checked my reservation. Yep, I had a reservation. So I went and visited my aunt, and I showed up at the hotel. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And my reservations was for the Woodlands, California. I did not have reservations in Texas. I had reservations in California. And so instead of like losing my cool or whatever, I said, well, can I get reservations tomorrow? And she goes, sure. Because they just had no rooms. So I was prepared to sleep in my car. I had just walked 500 miles across Spain, sleeping in different rooms. It's some rooms are like there's 20 bunk beds and there's men and women together and we're sharing bathrooms. It's Europe, so sleeping in my car was no big deal. And so I was fully prepared to sleep in my car that night. And I was super nice to the lady and said, thank you for your help. I made reservations for the next day. Most people would have lost their cool. Like, oh, you got to find me a room, and this is terrible. What was my mistake? I even called and I just didn't catch the connection. So when I told my daughter my plan, she's like, absolutely not. Come up here. You can sleep with Stephen and I. So we had a king size bed and I snore like a sailor. So I didn't want to, my poor son-in-law, I'm trying like not to, he's super nervous about his first triathlon. So it's myself, my daughter's in the middle, my son-in-law's on the end. None of us are sleeping. And it's like 3:30 in the morning and he's trying to be quiet. And my daughter's in the middle. She says, Stephen, just turn on the light. We're all awake. But showing up as my best self and not being upset and just laughing, and life's an adventure. I wanted to be remembered as someone who could be kind, not somebody. Now, the tricky part of this is, as I've been implementing these 3 questions on my personal legacy, come up to some situations that some things that are important to me might make it that people don't remember me in a way that I would like to be remembered, but living my life to fulfill my purpose is more important than what other people think about me. So it's been an interesting question it's a seesaw, right?
Right.
Yeah. So those are my 3 questions about how I'm creating a legacy to give.
What was your experience like before you had all this knowledge? Like why, maybe this was a good question to answer or to start the program with, but we didn't. What led you to go down this path?
Well, as it turns out, I'm a learner. I don't know if you've ever done the Strength Finders 2.0, but I loved it. When I took that test, it was the first time I ever felt normal because it explained a lot. My strengths, I actually saw them as weaknesses until I took that test and discovered that they were actually my strengths. And I'll tell you what my strengths are. I'm a commander, which means I'll take over a meeting, whether it's mine to do or not, which is really good when you work for yourself. But for a short time, I worked for corporate America, and I was in a meeting with the managing directors, not understanding the pecking order. And I was speaking my mind, and my boss was like, shh, but the things I was saying were true. I'm an achiever. I like to get things done. I'm an activator. I like to get other people to be marshaled on. I'm an idealization. I can think of 1,000 ideas. Not all of them are good. So that if I connect with a maximizer, that's a terrible idea, right? And then I'm a learner. So I've been a lifelong learner my entire life. And so I hope that answers your questions. It's in my very DNA.
Yeah. Well, specifically your own parental circumstances that led you into estate planning.
Well, and so here's the trick. My goal is to create an entire new industry at 61 years young. And it's an industry that's missing that really addresses several billion and trillion dollar challenges that we're having in our economy. But I'm not an attorney. I'm not a financial advisor. I consider myself a legacy planner. And this industry is basically human capital development at the family level to create systems that can be scaled and sustained from one generation to the next to give families the skills and gifts and talents that they need to be who they are and to be able to handle anything that comes in life.
What would some of those systems and skills be and look like?
Well, one of the easiest ones is to create a family mission for your family. Like actually sitting down and saying, we are a family that, and write out a mission statement. Believe it or not, families that lose wealth, 17% of them lost wealth because they said we didn't have a family mission statement to keep us unified.
Interesting.
And so what's been kind of interesting for me is understanding what gets people to draw in versus draw out. And so my first title on my book was Curse of Inheritance, How to Protect Your Family from Being Broke, Bitter, and Blaming You, right? Nobody wants to talk about death or aging. And so people are like, oh my gosh, please stop, right? But people do want to talk about how can I leave money to my family? A lot of people, are worried about how their wealth will affect their kids. When we look at the trustafarians and we look at, young people that are out of control, trust fund babies, their parents, they didn't want that for them, right? It's just that they didn't know that there was a better way. So the family mission statement helps that. That's one system that we actually use. And I've created a signature system that I've got these, because again, tiny hinges swing big doors. I help families create a stewardship program. Because if your wealth building is all about you and your family and what can we provide, it's not sustainable. You have to use your wealth to serve a higher purpose and to make the world a better place. So by creating a stewardship plan, it allows us to have the same language from one generation to the next, because it's what's fascinating. And you could get me to talk about death and aging and money all day long. You and your wife make a decision together, right? About your money, ideally. Usually it can be one person, but ideally it's a couple. When you think about leaving wealth to the next generation, well, you've got 3 kids. If you can create shared wealth, you can get economy of scales that protects them. And money doesn't protect anybody, but it does give you a few more choices, right? Well, typically people will separate that money into 3 different buckets. And so now, let's just say, for ease of sake, you've created a estate of $3 million, right? Mm-hmm. If you give each one of your kids $1 million, they have the war chest or security of $1 million versus if they had 3 million and you taught them how to make decisions together. Then they have a better chance of growing that 3 million in, let's just say they grow it to 9 million. And let's just say they all have 3 children each. Well, you went from 3 to now you've got 9 people that have to learn how to make decisions on $9 million. So it's the idea of creating a system to make decisions and how to protect, manage, and grow wealth that's a sustainable system. And what's been fascinating to me is that wealth can be purchased. Like if you took $15,000 when your kids were born, even probably less, and bought them a life insurance policy or annuity or something that could give them $1 million worth of retirement, I'd trade $15,000 for $1 million any day. Right. And it wouldn't even change their life. So there's families that are learning how to do this. And so that's one of the other plans that I help families with, is to create a generational wealth plan to say, how can we keep growing the money to support the family? And this goes back to the stewardship plan. You can make a bigger impact with the world when you have more money. It's not all about, I want to create wealth for my family. It goes back to that impact and that mission statement.
So let's talk about a family mission statement and what that comprises of. What would be some of the things that a family should consider?
Well, every family's is different. I mean, that's a totally customizable, right? I'm a big believer in coming up with a family story and a family motto. And the reason I do that is because have you ever worked in a big corporation that they had a mission statement that you couldn't remember it for anything?
Right.
I was like, our mission, it's kind of the same thing for families. So what I guide my families, we do end up with a mission statement, but what's even more impactful is to come up with a family motto. And I'll give you an example. There's a a clothing company here in Texas that manufactures women's Western wear clothes. And they were the second generation, and their family motto is Red's Got It. And Red was the name of the dog that their father had, that he lived in the desert of West Texas. And he would take the dog for a walk. And anytime a rabbit would come out and run, that dog would run and run and run until he caught that rabbit. He never gave up. Well, then they're in their third generation of grandkids running the company. And the grandkids kind of morphed into more sportswear. But their family motto is Red's Got It. Because no matter what happens, it reminds them to keep going and to keep pursuing and to never give up. So that's their family story. That's their family motto. And it's way easier to remember than a mission statement.
Interesting. The reason why I'm asking is because as we were talking, I kind of got one that popped in my mind, and I'm debating whether or not to share it or not. Let's go for it.
Go for it. I was going to urge you to go for it.
Yeah. And again, if you can critique this or pick it apart, you won't hurt my feelings, or say, hey, think about this. Okay. So it's totally changeable. And obviously it has to go through my family too, but loving God, loving each other, loving the world around us.
I love it. And I would never critique anybody's. The thing that I love about that is the simplicity of it and the three, right? And yes, you'd want to talk to your wife, but imagine how powerful that was if every day your 5 family members sat around and you said that statement and it becomes a filter of how you interact with the world. It becomes a filter of how you interact with each other. And it becomes a filter of what you do with your time, because your time is the one resource you don't get back. Right. I love it. Good job, Evan.
Thank you. It literally just like popped in my head. I was like, ooh, that's good. I'm going to write that down. So I've been taking like notes, just so you know. So when I'm looking down, I'm not looking at my watch.
No, and here's what I love about that too. And this is one of the things I work with people. Pay attention to the direction of your thoughts. That would be what I consider a download. It was divine thoughts that came into your mind versus you thought it up. Do you understand the difference of what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That was a download.
That's awesome. I like the idea that you talked about, like a stewardship plan, because then another thought was, okay, well, a health plan. Like earlier today, I was thinking about, my kids eat a lot of candy. Whether I give them some, grandma, like it just feels like it's always available to them. If it doesn't come from us, it comes from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want them to struggle with some of the struggles that I've had in my health and my weight and in my sugar addiction or whatever. And so I'm thinking, like, as I'm at the gym this morning, my son's not old enough to go to the gym. However, I was thinking about, well, maybe we can do like family workouts, that aren't really designed to be heavy workouts, but just more so, stretching, moving, getting going, just to build the habit of, or this concept of working out and realizing like, okay, this really ain't going to be a workout, but we're going to call it that so that it just gets them in the mindset of living healthy. And when I hear your stewardship plan, that's kind of my same thing. It might not be specific to like, my kids can't go lift dumbbells. My kids aren't going to, do 20, 30 push-ups or whatever. But there's this approach that we can take that it gets them in the vein of thinking about it so that it can become part of the culture.
Well, and here's an even more fun way of doing that, I think. So, Evan, you're talking about sustainable systems, right? I suggest a family meeting with your kids at the age that they are. And now that you've got your mission statement, you could say, hey guys, in loving ourselves is taking care of the temple that we're residing in. We're looking to get healthier. What are some ways that you think that we could exercise together, improve our eating? You get their interaction. And my daughter has a great system. She's got 3 kids like you. Hers are, he'll be 3 in August. Sister will be 6 in June, and the other sister will be 8 in August.
Mm.
And so they do a weekly family meeting. And they actually do an annual goal setting with their kids. And they actually have their kids like once a month, one kid gets to pick an activity. And but what she's done too, my point of this is they actually have a ticket, because she was doing the fight with you, like too much candy, too much of this, too much, So she established a little ticket system, and the kids could turn in their ticket any time of the day to get one snack, one, applesauce, she has different categories of food. And when they use their ticket, they're done. And the kids get to be a part of it. It's fun. And it kind of gives the children, the ability to start making those decisions and having input of what happens to their family. It's really an amazing thing to see.
As you're sharing that, here's what my mind is thinking as a parent. One, my children think they can go to the fridge or the pantry whenever they want. And I don't like that, because there's this constant like, okay, well, I'm mildly bored, so I'm just going to go grab something. Like I want to break that. So not only does this ticket idea limit them in the context, like you can't, like you get to choose when you spend this and what you spend this on, but when you're done, you're done. And It makes them personally responsible for the decisions that they make. That also enables them to help them make better decisions. So it's not only just about food, but even decision making. And I actually really like that idea.
Yes. And it goes back to we talked about self-discipline, right? Mm-hmm. And it gives you an opportunity to have such rich conversations about, because now that you have your mission statement and your 3-year-old comes and says, but Daddy, I really want a second one. It's like, but remember, we love ourselves. And so one of the things that we do to love ourselves is we only eat one of these a day. So what's something else that we could go do that, because, would you like a drink of water? Because it just gives you a really opportunity to build coping skills. And one of the greatest gifts you can teach your kids is how to be uncomfortable.
Mm.
And teach them that they can work through being uncomfortable, that there is a gift in uncomfortableness.
Right.
Yeah. I can see your brain turning.
Yeah. No, it's true, because I don't know specifically how old you are, so I don't know if you've ever had an outhouse or not.
I'm 61. That's why I'm free. I'm so thrilled to almost be 62.
That's awesome.
I'm okay.
Did you grow up with an outhouse?
No, but my dad did.
My dad did as well. And I think maybe even my mom. But, what I realized, like to go to the bathroom, especially at night, like it took grit. It took, and life has become so comfortable that we've become weak. Mm-hmm. And so when we make life and teach our children and ourselves, which is what I'm working on, how to be uncomfortable, it makes us mentally strong. And that's something that, whether it's working out or, waiting, I wanted to eat right before we got on this podcast, but I was like, you know what? Well, let me backtrack. So I wanted to eat before I got on this podcast for lunch, because I have another podcast after, and I'm going to prep for that one too a little bit. So it's at least going to be 3 hours if I don't eat now. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make myself a little uncomfortable. Instead of eating now, just force myself to eat a little bit late, because I haven't eaten anything yet today. Like I'm doing this intermittent fasting.
Me too. I had the same thought process. I've been intermittent fasting, and I thought, and like you, I've got 2 more appointments after this. And so it's like, oh, I should try to eat. And it's like, no, because I know my body is going to work better not trying to metabolize that food. So you and I are on the same path.
Right. And so that was my thought. But my thought was, well, let me just be a little uncomfortable and just push myself, even though I don't want to. And so I really loved that.
Well, and one of the things you asked me about my learning about all the things that I've been doing after my mom and dad passed away, it is the normal cycle of life to lose your parents.
Right.
In fact, we don't even have a word in our vocabulary for a parent who's lost a child. Think about that. We have widow, widower, orphan, but because it's outside of the natural cycle of living, right? It's not natural to bury your child. And so you asked me at the beginning of this, podcast, why is it so important to do? Unfortunately, parents lose children, right? And what we're doing is so very important. And where was I going with that? Gosh, my brain just exploded, Evan. Hang on. Yeah. It'll come back. But just to create systems where it's now, I know where I was going with this. That if you could create a system that every generation could become the best of what they could be. And not everybody's destined to be a PhD. Not everybody's destined to take over the business. It's not about trying to make anybody anything other than what God intended them to be, but it's about recognizing who they are as a human being and allowing and elevating them. Because I'm sure with 3 kids, they came out of the womb different, right? Yeah. Right? What's been fascinating about working with Ben is that you don't have to be who you were born to be. You can always be whoever you decide to be. And so part of this systematic is understanding what it takes to get to courage. And what I love is that science is actually catching up with soul and spirit. Mm-hmm. And there was a scientist, David Hawkins, that spent his lifetime studying the vibrational level of emotions. And when you can teach children how to have courage, that is the vibrational level and the vibrational energy that starts attracting the things that you want in life. So to give families a system to teach courage and then get to love is amazing, right? And so to be able to keep having those conversations about, yes, son, I know that this is scary, but when we have when we take action on the things that scare us, then we become more capable. And when we become more capable, we become more confident. So teaching children to have courage is the one thing that helps them build confidence, and let them make mistakes. Tell them there are no mistakes. It's just a different bag of goodies, right? I mean, you make this decision, you make that decision. There's no right or wrong. It's just a different path. And to share that you make maybe not the best choices, right? But to let kids suffer the consequences of their action is one of the best things that we can do as a parent.
Well, and then too, one of the things that I feel like I've done well at in my parenting is being honest with my own mistakes. Like when I wronged them, like, hey, I was wrong. I can't remember. I was driving somewhere and my heart just broke the way my son answered this. I don't specifically remember what happened. I think I lost my temper or something like that. And then I yelled at him a few different times. And then when I was in the car, I was like, Kason, I'm really sorry for losing my temper and yelling. His response was, it wasn't, okay, I forgive you. It was, even if you do it again, I will still love you.
Wow. How powerful is that?
And it just, I was like, that's what unconditional loves look like.
Mm-hmm. And you've given him a space to be able to do that, right? So, pat yourself on the back. Come on, do it. Pat yourself on the back. And think about how more powerful that'll be now that you have your mission statement.
Yeah.
Right? And it goes back to that personal legacy. It's really hard to be kind when your back's up against the wall all the time. So that's why how do you want to experience life? Make life easier, simpler, ease and grace. It ripples out, Evan, because as you do that with your family, then they can do that with their friends. Imagine the impact that your son will have in school if someone's having a bad day and he's like, it's okay. Even if you do that again, I still love you.
Yeah.
And at the center of it, though, and this is what gets people interested, is that it's okay to be wealthy. We kind of live in a society that is making it not okay to be wealthy. And I think part of that is because who do we have as an excellent role model of someone who's super wealthy and super kind and a superhero?
Right.
It's kind of a boring story, right? I have it all. And I've been fascinated to discover is that there's actually a large number of families that are very wealthy. I call them legacy families that have a system of transferring wisdom before wealth. They have a system for transferring vision and values. You just don't hear about them because they don't need the allocates. They're quietly going around their community making huge impact because they don't need the egotistical pat me, you know what I'm saying? They're just doing it because they've got their stewardship plans. They're doing it generation after generation after generation. You just don't know
them. Right. I like to, when we wrap up conversations, I like to end with the same 3 questions. First one being, in terms of negative self-talk, what are you currently struggling with?
Well, and thank you for asking that question. It's ironic because as I'm rereading my book, My Camino, My Life, the one I wrote when I got back, it was about not feeling about enough and that other people are judging me negatively. And so I continually put myself out there to be judged, to keep learning that lesson that I am enough. So it's
other than your husband and Jesus, what is the best decision you've ever made?
Well, I'm a Gemini, so I hate to just pick one.
Yeah, I don't even know what a Gemini is. I get it's probably something, but
yeah. So I think my best decision I ever made was understanding that vibrational level of courage and living what I call above the line. So the decision to live above the line is not one that's natural. It's very difficult. Well, I scratch that. It takes skills to learn how to do it. And each and every day, understanding when life gets stressful and it's so easy to snap at someone or cut somebody off or it's about your emotional being, right? So my best decision was making the decision, I'm going to live at courage or above. I'm going to make the conscious decision that no matter what happens to me, I'm going to keep going back to above that line.
What brings you peace?
At the end of every day, I keep a gratitude journal. And every night I write all the things that I'm grateful for. And one of the things that I found is super funny is there's some things you don't know you need to be grateful for until you see somebody doing them. And right. I always love to leave a little humor. You know, I'm in Texas and we pulled up at a stoplight one day and there was a man in front of us that I'm assuming is his wife. He had his wife's bra hanging from the trailer hitch and had a trailer hitch that looked like cow testicles. Yeah. And I turned to my husband and said, I'm so grateful that's not you. So sometimes you find things that you don't know you need to be grateful for until you see somebody do it. But really what brings me peace is to be grateful. And on a more serious note, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in August of 2019. And he went through 12 rounds of chemo just in time to end it on March 2nd, 2020. And we had already been in lockdown because he was, critically with flu. But this gratitude brings me peace. No matter what happens to us, it's just that wave of the ocean that we caught. And you can find great gratitude every single day in the teeny tiny moments. And that brings me peace.
Thank you, Cindy, so much for coming on to our show today. If people want to follow you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Oh gosh, I've got cindyarledge.com. I'm about to enter the Twitter world. I haven't done that yet.
Whatever.
Twit, all that kind of stuff. But just Cindy at cindyarledge.com is really the easiest way you can find me there.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. And where can people find your book? And what is it called?
It's at Amazon.com. And it's just, I've got 4 books. I think 5 will show, but 4 are mine. Cindy Arledge, CindyArledge at Amazon. And if you want to see what it's like about walking 500 miles across Spain, that's a good one to start. Or if you really want to know about how to build wealth for your family, the Legacy Family Way is a good one. But if you want to know about how to live a better life, Cracking the Inheritance Code is a good one.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And just really enjoyed you coming onto the show today. Thank you.